Today's episode is sponsored by Rev, the productivity powerhouse for content creators, journalists, market researchers, and more. Capture audio from anywhere, get AI-powered summaries and quotes, and leave security worries behind with Rev. Whether you're on the go or in the office, Rev's got you covered. Discover more at rev.com. Hi, I'm Kendall Kelton, and I'm your host today on The Rough Draft. Featuring honest conversations with folks from across the creative industry, The Rough Draft explores the creative process, tools, and resources used by some of the best in the business. From journalists to content creators and business leaders, we shed light on what it looks like to break into the industry, make mistakes, collaborate with others, and the essential tools that help us all along the way. This week, I'm super excited to be talking with Sky Dylan-Robbins, an award-winning nonfiction video producer and filmmaker, not to mention media entrepreneur. Sky has worked for ABC News and The New Yorker. She's also the founder and executive director of the Video Consortium, a global nonprofit media organization that connects and supports today's nonfiction filmmakers and video journalists to tell bold stories that change the world. All right. Hi, Sky.
Hi, Kendall.
Hi. Welcome to The Rough Draft.
Thanks for having me. Big fan of Rev and all that y'all do.
Yeah. So we're so excited to dive into your career as a nonfiction video storyteller, producer, journalist, all of the things. What initially inspired you to pursue journalism and then later, as I just mentioned, nonfiction video?
So this sounds a little woo-woo to open the...
We love woo-woo.
But I feel like we're all here for a reason, to help each other and help the world in some capacity. And I feel like my method or medium is through visual media, so to speak. And so I've always wanted to be in the media and work in it and use stories to help change people's minds and wake people up, et cetera. So I ended up after college, applying for, an executive assistant role at Tumblr, got it, ended up transitioning per crazy things that happen in the startup world to kind of launch an editorial magazine, so to speak, at Tumblr when it was super hot. Did that with some journalists for a couple of years and ended up transitioning at just the right time to The New Yorker when they were just starting to pursue video, and learned how to do journalism ethics, how to tell great stories from all the great writers there, and went over to NBC and helped start a doc unit over there. And along the way, started VC, and here we are.
And you just mentioned the Video Consortium, which I think you founded in 2015, correct?
Yes.
So I want to talk a bit about why you founded it, if you don't mind digging in.
Sure. At one point, I was the only full video hire at The New Yorker. And there was this whole experimentation thing going on. But there was one point where I was sitting at my desk and I had this internal epiphany. I was like, where are all the other people who are doing what I'm doing? Because there were the amazing writers and all the other people at the magazine, the photo folks and the multimedia folks, but no one was really doing video. And so I ended up sending an email. I think the subject line was the producer circle, and I sent it to some people at Vox and, the New York Times and independent people who I knew, 20 people. And I was like, guys, let's talk about the industry and, go to a bar and whatever. And so there was a desire for more community and the idea of pushing things forward collectively. And someone ended up going to LA, starting a chapter, et cetera, et cetera. And it kind of snowballed from there. But the whole ethos of it was the creative process is hard. Let's work together to do it. Innovation happens when people are in community together. And it's evolved from there.
And it's involved 2 chapters all over the world. And how many members now?
It's a vetted community, and we have about 5,000 members now. Yeah.
So for those who aren't necessarily familiar with VC, which is the acronym for it, do you mind explaining it a bit more? And then also nonfiction video, what that actually means.
The Video Consortium is essentially, we're a global nonprofit, but we're also a global community. And we support and connect video journalists and documentary filmmakers around the world to give them the tools and the community and the connections, allowing people to get the tools that they need to tell stories that catalyze change and wake people up, so to speak. And it's really evolved over these past 10 years with the changing tides of the media industry too, of course. And, when VC started, I would say the vast majority within the first few years, most of our members were staff. Now, the vast majority, I think it's like 70 or 80% are independent. And, as the industry changes, it's like there's more of a need for a support system than ever. And so we're really trying to fill that gap. Just in terms of nonfiction video, we have been saying nonfiction video because our community and the people, in terms of what they do and what they make, it marries the world of journalism, like hardcore journalism, with documentary filmmaking and everything that comes with that. Plus the idea that, as we all know, like with social media, things are changing. We're experimenting. There's VR, there's like social first stuff. And so we have been using the term nonfiction video to hopefully encapsulate all that video can do that is focused on the truth.
You mentioned everything's kind of flipped from being you're either a full-time staff member or part-time to now being heavily weighted on the freelancer independent side, because as everyone who's read the news, layoffs have happened year over year. I want to kind of talk about like what are those challenges facing video producers and journalists and documentarians today that seem like very top of mind for your group?
Well, I mean, there's so many, right? The whole world is changing with AI and all of that. I think a lot of people will agree that we've gotten really good at making stuff. There's awesome technology that's easy to get your hands on. You can make a beautiful film with a phone. The pieces are there. The biggest issue, it seems, is there's so much content, right? Content, quote unquote. Some people hate that word, but there's so much stuff. And so the big question that a lot of us at VC are asking ourselves is, how do we effectively get these great, important stories out there? Like, the distribution models are screwed up. Like, challenge number one, it's like you make a thing. How do you get your money back? And how do you also get it out there in an effective way? And then, of course, layoffs are happening at big companies, and that is just continuing, and ad revenue is screwed up. And so there's so many issues that are happening. But at the same time, it's like, what is the term? No mud, no lotus. Like, things are changing and we need to figure out a new way. And I'm optimistic that there is a different path forward, but we just need to put our heads together and innovate,
Is there anything that you have seen in the market right now that you're like, that's actually a good idea? Or are there any hopes that you see, hopefully in the short term on that point? Or are you like, I don't know, we just got to keep thinking about it?
Yeah. Well, in terms of journalism, on a local level, we've all heard that newspapers are dying, news deserts are everywhere, et cetera, et cetera. There is a curiosity amongst a lot of current paradigm models of newspapers that want to figure out new ways of reaching their audiences. We are launching a program that's bringing local newspapers across the country together, and we're going to help them do video better. And that happens in the fall. But the point is, like, there is a desire, and there are interesting case studies of newspapers like telling their stories for a younger audience and reaching people and being able to sell against that. So journalism, there's that. In terms of doc, like, there have been a few instances of really interesting, like, self-distribution models that people have been doing. Impact producing is hot right now, but if we can do that more and better and figure out better systems for that, I feel like that has potential too.
Do you mind explaining impact producing? Because I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. So, like, most creative filmmaker people, and I'm part of that category, it's like, you're so excited about making a film, you work so hard, and then you export the final thing and you think that you're done. And, like, really, that's not the case. It's like half of your work is done. We, as creative people, filmmakers, journalists, so often we don't think about or just have access to the tools in terms of like business, marketing, what happens after? How do you sell your thing? So impact producing goes back to this idea of like having a really exciting and different kind of and strategic plan for your story. And so impact producing can be everything from like screenings to online penetration,
And I imagine that even brings more of an emphasis on why having a supportive community is so important.
Totally.
Right?
Totally, Kendall. Yeah.
Before we move on, I want to touch on that community and what has been the most special part of the VC these last almost 10 years.
The ways that I've seen people benefit from being in community with others within the context of VC are innumerable. I mean, it goes from like getting the job of your dreams to finding, someone posting a job, like a gig for to crew up for something, and someone getting hired, and then those two people collaborating for years to come, or like a director and a producer meeting at like a local gathering that we had, and then seeing that like 4 years later they're working on their second feature together, and it just got bought by like XYZ platform.
Yeah.
Like that stuff happens all the time. I would say that like now we're more connected, but we're also more isolated, and figuring out new ways to help people connect with each other in meaningful ways online is like our next big challenge that we're thinking about. And then as we get bigger as an organization on a global level, doubling down on like regional and super local connections.
So we've talked a lot about nonfiction, video production, the VC. So I want to dive into your creative process. So how do you, and this might be a loaded question, but how do you approach bringing your ideas to life?
Great question. Well, I spent the first decade of my career making stuff and actually like producing, telling stories, so to speak. And now I've transitioned more within the context of the Video Consortium into infrastructure building. And so not exactly telling actual stories, but, orchestrating organizational development, so to speak, right? So within both, I would say that organization has been like a key thing in both realms. To-do lists are like my number one. I can get really overwhelmed up here. And as long as I like have a pen and like paper and I write down bullet points of what I need to do and can check things off a list, I feel like that's my biggest tool.
When we were doing the prep for this, you had also mentioned that exercise and meditation are important parts of your creative routine. So like I think everybody has that thing, right? Like I love to go for walks. It helps like break up kind of the monotony of the day and helps kind of clear things up in my head. But how do you think those habits have influenced your like productivity or creativity, so to speak?
Yeah, no, everyone has their flow, right? And their prep, like their pre-gaming situation. And I think I've gotten into a cadence of needing to have like inner cleansing and outer cleansing, so to speak, every morning. So, it's like we so often focus on the external, but like, going to the gym is great. But like, if you don't go to the gym in your mind, then you're screwed.
That's fair. Like if you're thinking about the rest of your day, are you actually like focused in on like everything else? That's a good
Exactly.
point.
And like being in the moment, right? Vigorous exercise to sweat out the day before, and meditation and a lot of coffee. Or like if I don't do those three things in the morning, then the rest of my day is kind of off. What about you? What's your thing?
I have a 4.5-year-old and he is an early riser. And like once he's up, he is like, we're partying. We're out. So like it's going to sound a little wild, but if I don't wake up early and have like just an hour, it could be just like walking our dog, or maybe it's working out. But if I don't have like that hour before, it really shoots the rest of my day. Cause like I get up and all of a sudden like you're expelling energy with your kid, or it could be a pet too, whoever you are. And then you transition into work, and then you get home and then it's back to the kid. And then it's like, then you got to go to sleep. So I have to have that like morning, whatever that is, just to like have my moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. I love that.
Well, but I also think something you brought up about pen and paper, it's so interesting because we have so many tools at our disposal, right? We have phones that can record things for you. You like the rise of AI and ChatGPT and all these other things. But there is still something very special about just those instrumental physical tools like a pen and a paper. And I wanted to know, like, how are you balancing these like influx of the new things coming out, especially as you are more in that like operational mindset and probably thinking through ways in which your community can work more efficiently. Like, how do you balance like all of the new things coming out with those like, but at the end of the day, like we're all humans and we don't want to lose sight on it. And
those fundamental aspects of like the core things that bring you back to, am I doing this effectively? Like, like pen and paper. And then one can't discount the idea of having a team of people that you work with and that you trust. I'm a big believer in always trying to surround myself by people who are smarter than me. I'm working really hard as VC grows to learn how to delegate better or like pass things off and like then step back. That's been a really big thing. But every now and then getting back to the present and thinking about what are the buckets of things and trying to organize things in my mind instead of having this like tornado going on all the time, and segmenting how to do things. It's segmenting like blocks of time to do things in. And then just trusting your colleagues those are all like big things.
So then for someone who may be just starting out in nonfiction video, what advice do you have for them, especially considering, we talked previously about challenges and the speed at which people are moving and, if they need to potentially pursue independent or local or, not everyone's going to all of a sudden get a gig at the New York Times overnight, right? So what is your biggest advice for them in terms of starting out their career?
This is in terms of producing content. It's a great question. I mean, everything's changing so much, right? The fundamentals, though, of being the kind of person that people want to work with and then having great work, I think like those two things are fundamental. The idea of learning how to networking is such a terrible word, but like knowing that community is important, that connections are really important, and making sure that you follow up with people all the time and send a thank you note and be curious. Don't just like talk at people, like listen, whether it's an interview or otherwise, and not feel like you're in a networking situation. Having that social, emotional awareness to just not be like, oh my gosh, I see that person. I want to make a connection with them so that I can get a job. It's like, let me hear where they are and have this be like a really good exchange and let them know that I'm a good listener. Like that's, as a human business person, evolving your career, I feel like those are really fundamental. And then just in terms of letting the work speak for itself, like practicing, whether you have access to a camera or not, if you want to go down the producing route, getting advice, being open to critique, always trying to improve your work and experiment with new things, especially as the industry changes.
But it sounds like it's the big takeaways for me and what you just said were be curious, like take a moment to listen before just bombarding with questions that may come across as self-serving. So it's like listen, curious, or curiosity, and community. Don't doubt like the power of many. Don't think you always have to do things on your own.
Totally. And I will say, and it changes for everyone, but almost all of my jobs have come through personal connections, or me applying for something and then saying, hey, can you write a letter of recommendation for me? Because I know you know this person who knows this person. Yeah. And that's always a really powerful thing to do no matter where you are, because people trust the people who they know.
Yeah. I know it's harder than it sounds, but the difference between like where I was in my career almost 20 years ago and now, like there's things like LinkedIn. Like it's very easy to find out if you have a connection somewhere.
Totally.
At least easier Now there's intimidation that comes with the actual outreach, but I have to imagine that's one of the biggest benefits of someone joining something like the VC. And do you have students or early career folks that make that you've seen become a valuable kind of part of your community in a way?
Yeah. Yes. We opened the membership up to students and more emerging professionals like a year and a half ago, so to speak. And it's been really beautiful to see students making connections with our professional members and having those relationships last. I mean, the ethos of VC is pick someone up and pull them up, and every generation should do that. And so yes, that's been great to see.
Let's dive into your documentary, On Our Own Island. It is such a personal and emotional film about your family. The film focuses on your parents' relationship and ultimately your father's passing. And I found it incredibly moving. I will try not to cry as we talk about it, but especially as someone who lost their own father just a couple years ago, watching your family navigate such a raw and human experience really resonated with me, and I have to imagine with others. So I'd love to talk about the decision behind why y'all decided to make such a film.
Sure. And I'm really glad to hear that it resonated with you, Kendall. So thank you for that. And I'm sorry about your dad.
Well, same to you.
Yeah. So. Yeah. We're in the club together. Yeah. So my mom was in the media, and I have learned everything from her. So I grew up with that knowledge of media being a powerful tool to help people, right? As we discussed. My dad was diagnosed with colon cancer, and we thought he would beat it. And as a family, we made a conscious decision to film the journey, so to speak, not assuming that everything would be okay and that this would just be a thing that we did.
Yeah.
And he wanted it to happen. It's about my parents, but more it's about this idea of two people who are in love and what happens when one of them passes on, and how do both kind of deal with that and the beauty that lies beyond that, right? So it was really hard. It was the hardest thing that I've ever filmed. When my dad was diagnosed, I was actually on a shoot for The New Yorker doing a story on a woman who was about to give birth. So it was just so ironic.
It's crazy juxtaposition.
Very crazy. And so, we filmed it. And then when he was dying, he was like, I want this to continue, and I want you guys to make it, and I want you to do it so that you can help other people realize that death can be a beautiful thing, so to speak, and that it's something that we need to get closer to. And we did it, and it played in film festivals around the world and help a lot of people kind of confront their fear of death and help their loved ones die in the way that they want. And I think he would be happy with it.
Well, you mentioned your mom. She had a pretty groundbreaking career in media, especially during the time in which she came to rise. How was y'all's collaboration through this? I mean, y'all are both professionals in your own right and have found your own successes, as you mentioned, but you were both emotionally tethered to something. So were there challenges there, or maybe it ended up being opportunities?
Yeah. Well, so her name is Ellie Dillon. She, at one point, was the most listened to female disc jockey in radio history. She replaced Don Imus. She had an Emmy Award-winning TV show. She knows her shit. And I'm 37 years younger than her. And I, throughout the process, I would have opinions and she would have opinions, but usually pretty much 99% of the time, she was right. And I get that. And so it was definitely not an easy process because she, I think I come from a family of very opinionated people, but it taught me a lot about collaboration, and it was a magical experience, and certainly not, it's weird to say in the context of your father's death, but I think it was a really interesting way to go through a major life event in a collaborative way and learn things in every way from it too,
How do you think that film in particular impacted either your storytelling or your view of storytelling?
On a logistical level, learning how to make a feature and going through all of those things was really helpful for me to be able to support the kinds of programs that we run for people who are making features. So everything from like what the editing process looks like to DCPs to E&O insurance to legal, et cetera, all of those things and distribution. And that was fascinating to learn. And then just generally, I think learning a lot about patience and like long-term project making. Everything that I learned on that applies to everything that I do. I think, any project that a person does that takes a while and that they're proud of, like it supersedes mediums, and just applies to other things too.
From the moment of diagnosis till he passed was 20 months. Mm-hmm. So almost 2 years. Y'all are, again, human, dealing with grief.
Yeah.
And then thinking about how to take that, having to edit and compile, and then talk about how you take this thing out to the world. And so once y'all were able to do it, how long was that process?
He was diagnosed in 2016, and so it was almost like 10 years.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I think that's just a testament to what you said of sometimes these very impactful stories take time, and you have to be patient and you have to adapt with the ebbs and flows of them. What was it like to screen at festivals and hear the audience reactions to the film?
Probably the most rewarding thing in the world. Spoiler alerts, a person does naturally die on camera and you see their last breath. And to be in a gigantic theater full of people, many of whom have never witnessed a death before. You could hear it. For every screening that we did, instead of there being a Q&A for the filmmakers, we would turn it back to the audience and ask them to share about their experiences.
Oh, I love that.
And people would stand up and like bawling, like say the most incredible things, that I saw this and I feel like my whole perspective of death has changed and of love. And like, I'm going to go talk to my blah, 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 who, et cetera. They were just incredible stories. And so also I think goes back to the idea of like the essential aspects of media and why we make films, to see a powerful story in the context of other people and feel that instead of just watching at home by yourself, which is also great. There's something so powerful about watching something and experiencing it together in a movie theater with people. And I'm grateful that people have seen and resonated with it. So it's great.
Well, and it's a topic that every one of us will have to face at one point or another, to however way it comes, right? Watching that moment on screen brought me right back to being next to my dad in his last moments.
Yeah.
And sorry.
No.
But it was it's a different form of community, right? Like, even though I was watching it at home by myself, it's like, oh, and I remember your mom, it was either you or your mom after his final breath. It was that, oh my God, like you could hear it in the background. And I was like, somebody else knows what this feels like. And that's very special. And I think that's just a testament to what you're able to do with your craft. So I will pretend I'm in that audience and somebody coming up and bawling, crying and say like, I see that and I appreciate it. And it means more to people than you realize.
That means so much, Kendall. Thank you. And I 100% feel you. And that goes back to the power of filmmaking and as you said, what you can do. And also just the idea that no matter how people experience it, whether it's at home or in a hospital or whatever, it's like at the end of the day, the grief that one has, it's about love. That's all it is. And love is the thing that's at the heart of everything that we do. And that's what ties us together.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to wrap this conversation, and also a very great analogy in terms of what y'all are trying to achieve with the Video Consortium. Before we go, though, I do want to ask if you could please let our audience know where to find you, where to learn more about the VC, and then we'll link everything in the show notes.
That sounds great. Thank you. Yeah. I'm off social media, but the Video Consortium is very active. I know. It's been hard. I'm really loving it off of that. But I support when VC needs it. Videoconsortium.org. We are on all of the platforms. If you're a filmmaker or you're a creative who's a student, an established person, whatever you are, VC is a really great community and would love for anyone listening or watching to join us. It's just videoconsortium.org/join, I believe.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. We'll talk soon, Sky.
Sounds great. Thank you, Kendall.
Well, that's it for today's episode of The Rough Draft. To learn more about our guest and to find links and resources related to the conversation, check out rev.com/podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to rate and subscribe in order to stay up to date with the latest episodes. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of The Rough Draft.